Welcome back, everyone. Just so that we can keep track of all these things we're learning when it comes to our lifecycle methods and our class component methods, as well as rendering and re-rendering. I know it's a lot of new concepts that we're learning at once, which can be confusing. So just so that we're aware of the order, as I mentioned before, it's constructor, then render, then component did mount, and if component did mount updates the state, another render. We're just gonna update this console log text so that it shows us the method, so that as we build out this application, we can see very clearly what's happening. And it's really just for your own familiarity in case you get confused. So instead of console log 1, we put constructor. Instead of console log 3, we put component did mount. And instead of console log 2, we put render. So now that we have this, we go back to our application. We see that when we refresh, we'll see that our constructor runs, then our render runs, component did mount runs, then render runs, and then of course, our monsters array gets logged from our callback in our set state call. So everything here is just a recap. Now moving forward, let's talk about how we're actually going to build out this application. And in order to do that, we got to talk a little bit about what we're looking to do. So as I mentioned before, we have these different H1s that represent different monsters. Now, before we actually start styling these H1s to look more like the final product, what we want to do instead is actually work on functionality. You always want to work on functionality of your application before you work on the CSS. Because once you have the functionality in, it's easier to style afterwards. At least that's the way that I prefer to do things. So in order for us to think about the functionality, let's actually take a look at our final product. What are we trying to work towards? So here, we have these different monster cards, which represent the different monsters in our H1. So instead of H1s, we have cards, but as I mentioned, that's the styling. We're not going to work on that. Instead, we want to add in this search functionality. So what does the search functionality do? Well, let's say that you want to find Clementine Bausch. As you type it in, it will filter out the monsters that do not match in name to what we've typed in here for our string. So CLE only matches 2 cards. Clementine and Clementina. In fact, if I type out Clementine, it should get rid of Clementina. But as I remove it, it will bring back anything that does match. So this is the functionality that we want to add into our Monsters Rolodex project. Another thing to include is also the fact that if we hit this X, it will also clear the search field and in turn also bring back all the different monsters that were loaded. So this is the feature that we want to build in. Now, before we start coding this right away, with any feature we're building, we want to think about what it is that we need to do, because only then do we get a better, clear idea of the requirements of this feature. And from there, it's the best way to start moving forward when it actually comes to planning out the code that we want to write. So what we need and what we're missing is we need an input field. And with this input field, we need to be able to insert text, so allow the user to type into it, and filter out our monsters. So let's just think about that. Given what we have, we clearly don't have the input field. So we know we need an input field somewhere. So let's start with that. Inside of this app, I'm going to use an input field. And this is just the same input field that you have inside of HTML. But one thing I want to mention is that all of these different HTML-like JSX tags that we're writing, the divs, the H1s, the inputs, or any single HTML tag that you can typically write inside of React in this JSX, it looks like HTML, but it's a little bit more advanced than that. What it is really is that it's pretty much a component that React has already included into the JSX. So just like the components that we're writing, all of these are also components. An easy way to think about this is that when you look at this app, this class app, we know is a class component. We've been writing it, and we export this out. But when you look inside of index.js, what's happening is we are importing this app from .app. So we're importing this whole class component that we're writing. And what we're doing is we are rendering it right here. But if you look at this, do you notice that this looks like HTML? Well, this does. But again, we're still inside of JSX. And the important thing to notice here is that what is happening is that this app is being written in JSX like an HTML tag, the exact same way that these divs and this H1 and these inputs are as well. And the reason for this, of course, is the fact that React has created these HTML-looking components for us. For every HTML tag, there is an equal React component. And the reason why React does this is because it allows us to bind, once again, functionality to the UI. So if you think about this input, what do we want to do with this input? Because with all of these inputs, we typically have a bunch of HTML properties we can provide it. In fact, any HTML property you can think of is equally available on these React HTML components. One thing, though, that I want you to notice is that some of them are named a little differently, and we can see this explicitly up here in this div. We notice that instead of class, it's class name. And the reason why it's class name instead of class is because this is written in JSX. And JSX is a syntax extension of JavaScript, meaning that all of the rules of JavaScript apply to JSX because you're really just writing JavaScript with some additional functionality. And class being a protected keyword in JavaScript means that class is also a protected keyword inside of JSX. When you think about classes, we use it up here. And what it does is allows us in JavaScript to create classes as well as class components. So for this reason, React cannot just allow us to use class freely inside of our JavaScript because there's a very key functionality of JavaScript that's tied to class whenever it appears inside of JavaScript and equally inside of JSX. So keeping that in mind, that's why it's class name. So if we wanted to give our input a class, then we have to use class name. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So here I'm going to say that class name is equal to search box. And what other input properties do we want? Well, we want to give it a type. So we want to say that the type of this input is going to be search. We also want a placeholder. So placeholder is going to be the text that shows up inside of an empty search box. So before the user types in anything, what do we want to put there? Usually with this text, you want to put some kind of text that explains what it's going to do. So I'm just going to say that it's going to be search monsters. And that text search monsters is going to show up in that empty input box when users haven't typed in anything yet. Finally, now what we want to do is we want to actually code in the functionality in order to filter down this list. So how do we do this? Well, typically with inputs, what happens is that you have a change handler that you can bind to an input. So this is an event handler very similar to our button. If you think back to our button, you remember that earlier we had a button that would change the name inside of our search field from Yihua to Andre, and we used the onClick handler. So here, instead, we have a similar handler, but every time the value inside of the search box updates or changes. And this is the onChange handler. And just like with onClick, you get to pass it a callback. And this callback runs whenever the value inside of this input changes. So what we want to do is we just want to say, okay, what's going to happen every time it changes? Well, we want to start filtering out the different monsters that we have available. And luckily for us, just like with this event handler inside of regular HTML JavaScript, with JSX, this is pretty much the same event handler. So what we're going to get back is we are going to get back an event. So for those of you unfamiliar, let's just quickly console log this event so we see what we receive. So coming back into our application, we see that we have our input field. We see we have our placeholder text, search monsters. And now if we start typing in, if I type L, we see we get this synthetic base event. This event, if you look closely at one of these properties, has an underscore React name. So this tells us it's a React event because React is in here. In typical any other events that are generated by your browser or your DOM, you would not see underscore React name. And the reason for this is because React is generating these events for us with these different methods that it provides us in those JavaScript HTML components. The reason for that is just so that it makes it easier for us to do this kind of event handling, like this onChange handler. And the reason why there's an underscore is because these are typically the kinds of properties that React adds to these events, but they're not for us to access. We shouldn't be accessing anything with an underscore. Generally, everything else, though, we do want. And the main thing that we want is target, because inside of target, other than all of these other keys and values that you could use, These are going to be mainly valuable because of this value. Inside of value here, you see is the string L, which is what we have typed. Now, if I continue to type E, in the next event, if I check in the target, what we see is that the value is LE. And similarly, if I type another A, we see that we're going to get inside of target and value LEA. So we know that with this, we're now able to actually get the value. Now, this is going to be my challenge to you. Knowing that we need to use the event.target.value, I want you to take this and actually try and filter down this list of monsters. We've done something very similar already. We know that we need to use this handler to update our state object or our state array for monsters. What you have to do is figure out how to use this in order to filter it down. And to give you a hint, there's actually an array method called .filter that you can leverage for this. I'm going to include in the resources folder a link to .filter so that you can take a look at it, but I want you to try and implement it yourself. Implement a way where as you type, you will filter out these monsters. So good luck, and we'll do it together in the next video.